the Evolution Security Podcast. Well, everybody, welcome to the Evolution Security Podcast. Once again, I am Aaron Davis. I'm here with my tactical twin, Eric Davis. And we have another awesome guest tonight. His name is Jerry Wetzel from Red Zone Threat Management. Jerry, we are so stoked to finally have you on. We've been talking about it for a bit. The stars finally aligned. And we
that was
have
good.
You on, so
if I just kept hounding you guys, eventually you wouldn't be able to escape. And once I ran into Eric at the Combatives Summit, I'm like, all right, I got him cornered now. So there's no way out of it for him. I have no shame.
I'll just say this, and Aaron, I'll give it back to Aaron. It's like, I cannot understand how it's taken this long, because I've wanted, I've told Aaron about you, and I've known of you and like your videos and a lot of what you've been teaching around the world, and also interacted with you on Total Protection Interactive. I've
way
been
back
on
in the
there
day.
since I started on there maybe 2005,
okay,
somewhere in there. And so, but anyway, great to finally have you on the show, brother.
It's good to be here, guys.
Yes. So, Jerry, why don't you go ahead and give our audience a little bit about you? Let us know where you're from and all that good stuff, and what got you to where you are now.
All right. So I started before the UFC. I'm an old man. I'll be 50 tomorrow. And
I guess we're old
pre-UFC, I was doing the JKD thing and trying to figure out, with like a lot of my contemporaries, how to combine skill sets into something functional. As a kid, I was a Bruce Lee kid, but I was never into the whole cult of Bruce Lee. It was more just a means to try and put things together, and he seemed to be on the right track. And then, so that was the stand-up stuff I was doing, and then I started getting more into figuring out how force-on-force stuff started training. So you started cobbling together gear so you could do clumsy scenario type stuff and figure out why certain things wouldn't work. Then the UFC hit, and a bunch of my training partners went and did jiu-jitsu, which I should have done. I mean, I run a gym in Southern California, and, well, I didn't at the time, but a lot of them went and trained with Mark Eckerd because one of Hickson's brown belts was teaching, but I still wasn't sold on jiu-jitsu, and I figured it was just kind of a necessary evil that I would get into. So I went and trained with Boss. Actually, I got his thing up here in the office. I went and trained with Boss Rutan down at Beverly Hills Jiu-Jitsu.
Yeah. And
because he still had a stand-up game, and he was hilarious. He had a great personality. My time probably would have been better spent from a technical standpoint if I had done jiu-jitsu instead, because the Japanese pankration approach to grappling just doesn't have the elegance that Brazilian jiu-jitsu has. But it was a great experience. And then once he started fighting in the UFC, he was never around at the gym anymore. And so you'd have Marco Huas or some of those guys coming in to cover his classes. But I stopped training there and finally started training jiu-jitsu with Higan Machado over in Torrance. So fast forward 10 years, and now I had been teaching in my garage off and on. I got married, and my wife said, you know what, you're not teaching out of our garage. So I opened up a teeny tiny 1,000 square foot facility and started running it there in 2001. And 22 years later, I'm still doing it. It's my full-time gig. I run a full-time MMA gym, and then I also travel and do the Red Zone stuff. And they both have, the day job, the brick and mortar business, is fun, and it's fulfilling, but there are some gaps in terms, obviously, because you're still doing the combat sport as a combat sport. So my gym has jiu-jitsu classes, Muay Thai classes, and conditioning classes. Before I turned over my stand-up classes, my stand-up striking classes, to one of the coaches here to run as a strictly Muay Thai class, I was doing more of an MMA style striking class, so a little more focused on the hands, dirty boxing, takedowns were always available, and so it was kind of mixed in that way. So that's where we're at right now. Now, as far as the red zone stuff is concerned, and I'm sorry, I'm kind of just going off on a tangent.
You're good, buddy. Keep going.
Right. Coming from the JKD Kali background, I taught a lot of the weapon stuff, that everybody was doing out of the Inasano camp. And a person close to me was in an encounter where he was attacked, and nothing held up. He was cutting the guy. He was trying to defang the snake, and it didn't work out. The guy didn't drop the knife. Eventually, they kind of swung at each other. He got his clothes cut through, but fortunately, nothing hit him. And then it separated. But I sort of had a crisis of faith at that point. This was maybe 97. And so I kind of junked what I was doing because I was angry, like a little angry atheist teenager who was just throwing out things because I was mad because it didn't work and I felt betrayed. And so we started going, you know what? Let's just get some gear or minimal gear, get a training blade that hurts and a come at me bro mentality, and then we'll see what evolves. And in about 2003, we had what was the Red Zone Knife Defense program. I had to come up with a name for this thing that we'd been doing in the gym. And before I did that, I had, chronic low self-esteem. So I'm like, no, somebody's got to be doing this. So I'm looking up all the videos, VHS tapes that you could find at the time and seeing who else was doing knife programs. But what we were doing in the gym had just kind of had a different take in terms of the positional control. So we're like, okay, so we put our name to that. So a lot of people associate it. Like I said, if I have a name at all, it's because people know about the Red Zone thing, because I got into a lot of online arguments with a lot of notable people about, the way that we did things, and they would say, well, that wouldn't work, and they took it as an offense because it was against the more orthodox approaches to weapons defense. But what I started to see is I had this very pragmatic approach to knife defense, right? No fanciness, no nothing. Train everything 100% and be as honest as you can about the problem. But then my approach to the empty-handed portions of self-defense were MMA. I'll MMA them, right? Striking, takedowns, throws, good, but it didn't really have. It was still a sport model tried to be applied to a street context. And it's not quite the same. It's a great foundation. Like having a good striking foundation, having a good jiu-jitsu foundation is important, but there are nuances that you have to prepare for. And nowadays, it happens a lot more. I mean, at the Combatives Summit, you saw so many people with their takes on these things, and grappling in a weapons-based environment. There wasn't as much striking, but I guess we'll get to the summit in a little bit. I don't want to digress, but
no problem.
And actually, we had talked about switching what I was showing, because originally I was going to be teaching the knife defense, and they're like, hey, can you show the adaptive striking program instead? This was like the day before, but it was kind of like, I can, but there are some things that I wanted to show and address. And so I stuck with that. And then for next year, I'll probably be showing some striking stuff.
Oh, excellent. You're talking about at the summit next year.
Yes, sir.
Oh, excellent. Yeah, and we're certainly going to talk about the Combatives Summit a little more here in a second. But what I would also say, number one, is that some people that we both, Aaron and I, respect greatly, definitively give you credit for a lot of what they do.
That's
and
right.
What one of those individuals is Paul Sharp. And,
yeah, Paul's incredibly generous with his praise. Like my game in my inside game, especially when it comes to wrestling, and even some of the troubleshooting we did with the contact elements of the knife defense program, were heavily influenced by like me just going, Paul, do you have an answer for this? Because I'm having some issues with this kind of guy. You get the guy who's 6'3", 6'4", or whatever. And so, yeah, Paul's very nice that way.
Paul's an incredible person. I've trained with him before, and he most assuredly gave you credit for one of the 2-on-1 progressions that we did with knife defense. But I also understand that Paul states that he used some of your concepts in the real world. So, that's legit for certain. And another person that we respect greatly, Cliff Byerly, also credits you with a lot of what he does, including being his striking coach.
Yeah,
so that's pretty badass too.
Yeah, Cliff is fantastic. He's the national treasure. The things that he just constantly throws out. Like I saved in my phone one of his quotes around Thanksgiving, just because he throws out such incredible stuff. But yeah, I met Cliff when he was still with LAPD, and he came out when he was still living out here in California, and he was coming over to train. Actually, he was coming up from, I think, San Clemente, driving up San Clemente, so driving a little over an hour probably to come train a couple times a week. And so it was really cool to have him take the information to work with him and then come back with all kinds of stuff. And he brought the team down once and got to mix it up with them. So it's really nice when people who you respect and who've had such an influence in one way or another say nice things. I really appreciate it. So thank you both, Paul and Cliff.
Yeah, they're great guys and coaches of ours as well. Well, real quick, before we move to some of the Combatives Summit discussion, I'd really like, can you give the audience a description of you kind of alluded to it earlier, but your adaptive striking program?
Cool. So going back to the probably too long narrative about the knife defense program,
brother.
That is the first thing that opened my eyes to the fact that there was a disconnect between how I was training combat sport and my thought that I could just directly translate it, and then something that was very streamlined, no fat on it at all, which was the knife defense program. And so I started going, you know what? Fights are a linear program. They're not circular like an MMA fight or a jiu-jitsu match or whatever, where I bring this thing in here, I put out my jabs and crosses and hooks, and then you do something, and then we back up, assess, come back in, and we kind of go in and out, right? It's just in and something happens, and then somebody runs away or whatever. So there's a linear process going all the way back to before you make any physical contact, before maybe even anybody ever says anything. And so I realized that, okay, there needs to be a straight line in terms of our process. Once I've decided I'm going to engage with this person on a verbal level, and you do all your managing unknown contact stuff with them, then it either goes physical or you handled it and it stops. If it goes physical, then I don't want to exchange. I don't want to hit. I don't want to stay standing for that matter. Not that I necessarily want to be in a grappling match, but there are too many things the person can do when we're standing, because they still are free to move away from me, pick me up, do all kinds of stuff. And if they're big, strong, on PCP or God knows what, it's going to be an issue. And when I'm in a standing entanglement, your tunnel vision's like right here. So my peripheral vision, my ability to see what's going on or them going to a weapon gets diminished the longer we stay in that standing entanglement. So I'm always looking. For me, once I make physical contact, it doesn't stop until I put the person on the ground. Whether I go with them or not depends on the context. But it gives me more time to create space to disengage and go to tools, to run away, or to hold them there and chill them out, or to put them to sleep or scale force up as I need to. All of that later became known as the Red Zone Prime program, right? So under Red Zone Threat Management, we have the Knife Defense Program Prime, which was the first book I put out, and then Adaptive Striking, Ground Fighting Overview. So those are 4 programs we have, and then we have a women's for self-defense thing, the Chrysalis program. But the Prime outline is basically, once I realize this is going to be a physical altercation, here's how we lay it out, how we prioritize, and again, how we throw out as much of the fat as we can so that what we're left with are techniques and tactics that will work for most people in most situations, against most people, with and without weapons, right? Which again, the longer I stay in a standing entanglement, the more likely something presents itself. So I've got to find a way to end that. Now, that's the ideal. But things don't always work out the way we want to. I may be ambushed. I may be pinned against the wall. I may have all kinds of problems. The person may decide to force a takedown on me, right? Just grab on and try and rip me to the ground. So the adaptive striking program fills in the gaps where my prime curriculum fails. So it's basically the gaps between grappling and striking. But it fills in the gaps so that I can get back to my main game plan, as opposed to turning it into a striking fight. So if I grab them by the head and I'm fighting out of a single collar tie, it's so that it keeps their hands occupied. If I drop them, great. But otherwise, as their hands come up to deal with the striking, I can go back into a better control and rip them back to the ground, which is what I wanted anyway. So I need to be able to hit when they want to hold. If they grab onto me, rather than me just grabbing back and both of us sitting into a wrestling kind of pummel, I will allow them to use their hands to hold onto me while my hands are free. So being able to stay on your feet, being able to deliver strikes effectively, being able to access and protect my tools is important. So I don't need to grab just because they're grabbing me, but that's kind of what we do, right? It's why in the early UFCs, once everybody kind of accepted that grappling was a thing, you had a lot of really long, boring rounds where guys would just kind of grab onto each other and fall. Because they accepted that they had to grapple, but they didn't yet buy into the fact that they needed to learn how to do it properly. So it's what we do. When people punch, we punch back. When people grab, we grab back. So being able to switch our mindset and find a way to exploit that is much better. So it's crazy fun. And I'm not going to name names, but I've had the opportunity, because my jiu-jitsu coach is a minor jiu-jitsu celebrity these days. He has a lot of people come through. So I've had opportunity to have some big name guys that I go, look, I'm going to play hands. I'm not going to throw hard or whatever. You go ahead and rip me to the ground, and put myself into the wall, let them go, and allow to play hands. And you find it's actually not really hard. It's harder to hold on and hit when they're trying to rip you to the ground. But if you can keep your hands free and use head position and hip position and angles, you can stay on your feet and just fire shots. And a person who's purely trying to grapple runs into some issues with that. It's the same thing wrestlers, people think there's no striking in wrestling. There's striking in wrestling. These guys beat the crap out of each other. Any grappler who's ever wished that they could just hit the guy in order to make this work better would like the adaptive striking program, because it's where that fits in, where your striking fits in with your grappling, and where your grappling fits in with your striking. Because basically, if they're trying to tee off in here, the last thing I want to do is stand in mid-range with somebody and exchange, because that's the shots that you don't see happen, because everything is, like I said, you're in that tunnel and it's very blurry what's going on. So I'm either going to be inside or outside. And if I'm trying to put them on the ground, I'm going forward. And one of the things that's a consistent gap, and it wasn't even me, it was one of my longtime students who actually, all of the same guys that Drew, who's one of my students, Drew Pruse, who's actually from back in the TPI days, and he's been training with me for a long time. He's PD out here in California, but he brings out all of those guys to teach seminars all the time. And he was the one that kind of pointed out to me that one of the consistent qualities in all of the programs under Red Zone Threat Management was pressure. And a lot of times what happens is when people started realizing they need to integrate wrestling or combat sport into their combatives game, into their self-defense game, they tried to just directly connect it. So all of a sudden guys learned a little bit of Greco, learned a little bit of wrestling, and then put on their gear and went and tried to just wrestle the guy. And there still needs to be some seasoning. It still needs to be adapted for the environment that you're putting it into. And what ended up happening is guys would crash into the clinch, and then both guys get underhooks, and now both guys are swimming, and both guys are just wrestling. Except it's not even good wrestling, because they're not wrestlers. They're combatives guys trying to put wrestling in. Mm-hmm. One of the things that is an equalizer on that is when you realize you're basically going to shock and awe. So when you tie on with the guy, you need to be driving constantly. It takes away their ability to back up and open up space to throw punches or to clear tools, because you've got them on their heels the whole time. And if they drive back in, then cool. I can now do all my pulling stuff, all my snap downs and throws or I can turn them and open up space for myself. And all of these elements are available in combat sport. All of the techniques are there, the tactic is a little bit different because it's not set linear and because both guys are playing the same game, right? And the rules of the game dictate how it's played. So if both guys are just trying to put in wrestling into a combatives environment, you just end up with wrestling with weapons and not a game plan for a fight.
That's good.
And see, and then just to take a drink to make an exclamation point.
That's great explanation, Jerry. I don't think I could have drawn it out of you any better. so
drawn
awesome.
out is the appropriate term.
So speaking of the Combatives Summit, that, again, knowing you for years online, but never having met you before, finally this last September, we met up at the Combatives Summit, which I'll start the discussion this way is, man, what an incredible event. And I just wanted to know what your thoughts were on the event as a whole.
Honestly, I was 100% behind it and skeptical, quite honestly. Like, John hit me up and said, here's what I'm thinking about doing. And I'm like, whatever you need, I'm in. Okay, we'll make it happen. But I'm like, having been, again, this is 20 years into doing this as a full-time gig and running across the egos I've run into with my own coaches. I'm like, how are you going to get all of these guys in here? Because none of them are going to get paid what they get paid. And they're all going to have to share the limelight, so to speak, right, with each other without pulling egos or asking for more time. And I knew, like, there were some of the guys on there. I know Cecil, I know Craig, I know. So there were some guys I knew wouldn't pull that, but there were a lot of people I don't know. So I'm like, there's just no way with the amount of people he wanted to get in there. I didn't think it was going to go through. And he did it with flying colors. And that must have been a crazy hustle to try and juggle all of that stuff and make sure everyone was taken care of. The event itself was amazing fun. It was great to be able to meet Yugu and to be able to meet so many other people that I've only had, online interactions with. But also the collegiality between all of the coaches and kind of support. Like, there wasn't what I feared would be there, which was quite shocking, honestly.
Cool. Yeah, and to be honest with you, I do, from what I know of you, you are a skeptic, and what I mean by that, all of the individuals that are in this path that have arrived at a lot of these philosophies, it's because they're skeptics, right? So, but I'm prefacing that my next statement with, when you said that, I was still honestly surprised that you felt that way. However, now that you say it, I understand. But you're right, man. It was an amazing. There was none of that. I mean, the environment, just the feel of the whole event was just awesome.
I think one of the things that's been cool to see evolve and kind of was proven by that summit was that there are a lot of people who, regardless of what their initial background was, sort of started their own problem-solving journey to deal with what they saw as shortcomings. So there was an excitement of discovery that everyone kind of brought with them. Everyone went, I got to find a solution for this because I don't like how this is being run, or how they learned it, or they found ways to tweak it. And so instead of bringing their egos, they brought enthusiasm for the topic, and they were interested in what solutions other people came up with. And for me, like, I'm trying to think, there was a couple that really set out. It was cool actually for me also to see, like, even Cecil, because I'd never actually seen any of his coursework in person, right? I've known him since he was a blue belt, and we used to see each other at like Straight Blast Gym stuff. But it was neat to see his stuff. Ben's stuff was awesome, and he and I are very, very similar in terms of how we think and coach. So I enjoyed watching his stuff a lot. Craig's stuff was great. It was cool to watch John be able to hold the room the way he did. It was neat to meet Aaron Giannetti and see kind of where he's at and how he's solving certain things. So yeah, that whole event was really neat. I'm looking forward to another one. So, and I think everyone saw by the end of it that, okay, we could definitely do this again, and we would do it better next time, especially like the Q&A. That needed an MC.
It did. It did. It absolutely did. I will agree with that.
Well,
So
one difference, I'll be there this year.
Yes,
Can't
thank
wait.
God. I was
yeah,
bummed when I heard you weren't going to be there.
Yeah. It'll work out this time for
Cool.
sure. Thank you.
So Jerry, so I'll just, I don't want to go into all the details in your content or your module, but I think it's important for people that may not have any knife control training or dealing with the knife to a certain extent. I kind of want to give them an idea, kind of what your base or what some of your base is, and so in my opinion, it has a wrestling feel, but to your point, it's not wrestling
No.
for wrestling.
In fact, I would argue that some of my approach is opposite of wrestling.
Okay.
It has a grappling element in 100%. But the way I teach head position, I never go to inside head position, because a person with no game and a ton of panic or mania will grab onto your face if it's anywhere near them. And someone posting on your head is legit even without game. So I don't bring my head to the inside, but it's a great place to put your head in wrestling. So that's one area where I don't do it. And I think with regard to all of the programs that I teach, but knife defense, since we're talking about it, one of the, it's on some of the logos and the stuff outside there, is one of the quotes that I always use is, what is your test? Because people contact me all the time and say, hey, I saw this really next level collie stuff, and I think you're wrong about your assessment about how they do their empty hand stuff. And I'm like, I'd have to see it. And then they show me some pattern drill or two-step sparring thing. And I'm like, I mean, when you tell me these things are legit, I'd have to ask you, what is your test? What is your test for that? You know what I'm saying? If you are giving somebody permission and put money on the line, to give you an idea, all right, it's $500 if you can make this work, right? Or if you can stab me, right? Then they're really going to give you some energy, right? Even a person who loves you will come at you. And now you can really test it, as opposed to them working with you to make this thing work. So with the foundation there, the idea that somebody's coming at you with that intensity, where they actually have something they think to gain from stabbing me multiple times, you find that there are relatively few things that will actually work. And I've got to get control of that person. So it all becomes kind of working up the ladder, shut down the weapon-bearing limb, body up on the person, and find a way to put them on the ground, right? The linear process of the knife defense program is where I went, well, why not just do that empty hand too? Like, rather than exchanging with the person and using a straight MMA approach, which is, again, a great foundation. I'm not a hater. I run a gym, but I don't want to exchange. I don't want to get into an altercation with somebody and find out that this guy's Golden Gloves, that this guy's a big name fighter in some other country, and I just didn't know who he was, and I just opened up space for this guy to light me up. So if I'm going hands-on, I've got to make this encounter as brief as possible. So I'm always looking to shave off time and to throw out anything that will only work on certain body types. And because I teach, and I have to teach people who have limitations in size, strength, mobility, whatever, I've got to find the things that work for most people, against most people, in most situations. So it has to be grappling that isn't explosion and power based, which a lot of wrestling is, right? It is probably that wrestling is probably the single best foundation for combat sport, because wrestlers have a work ethic. They'll go until coach tells them to stop. They'll go throw up and come back, right? They're not worried about getting taken down, right? And you can teach them to deal with some punches, and they're good at getting up if they choose to. So it's a great foundation. But from a technical standpoint, like we said before, there are things we need to alter in order to streamline this thing, so I'm not just wrestling for wrestling's sake against another wrestler. Because a lot of the positional stuff is set up to deal with the fact that the other person is trying to take me down at the same time. Not that the person's trying to punch my face off or may have a weapon in his hand or is just going to tie me up while his buddy's going to do something to me, right? I don't want to be in a prolonged clinch. So I've got to have an end goal. So not just to the clinch, but through the clinch and to somewhere else. So whether I'm dealing with the knife specifically and trying to tie onto the person, shut them down, get them so that they can't move away from me and they can't use their potential size and strength advantage to their advantage by putting them on the ground to where I can get the weapon out of play, or I can go to my own tools because he can't move away from me briefly. I forgot what I lost my train of thought on that, but all of those processes involve getting to control and putting them on the ground, and that's the knife defense program in a nutshell. I'm not a big fan of going to tools to deal with a knife. I'd rather have control of that person before I decide to go to anything on myself. I want both hands free to go after them and take whatever they have away from them. And you find, and this goes back to, I was saying that same thing that a lot of the guys who were at the summit have experienced and put into their own thing, and then it kind of manifested in their own way, which is, if you're honest about the problem and you go, you know what, we can test that. And I don't mean it for it to sound arrogant. God knows, because that drives me crazy in this community. But all of this stuff is testable. You can get the gear, and there's plenty of safety gear out there. You could come up with whatever idea, but then let's go try it, right? And let's just be honest about it. And if it works, it works. And if it doesn't, it doesn't. And between the coaches, that's that thing that I saw that everybody kind of had in common, was they all had that same problem-solving approach. So when someone said, well, I have a difference, they're like, okay, let's try it. Or show me why that works, because you came up with a different solution. And it works out.
Well, and you know, Jerry, to give, well, two things. Number one, I also liked your approach in your block is that, and forgive me if I phrase this incorrectly, but we didn't start disengaged. You said, we want to start with the problem first. And so we were already attached in an initial control position. And then for the audience out there, we moved into the way that you use the 2-on-1 baseball bat type of grip at first. And you had us driving our opponents back and forth, learning that control. I would compare it to, it's almost like for folks that had done ECQC, what you were teaching there at first was kind of like the mountain goat drill, you know, driving with the head, even though they're different. That's the way I felt like that was the start of that drill. And then we moved into what ended up being like some modified type Russian positions, not Russian as in the rest. I mean, kind of.
Yeah.
And then also some modified Russian positions for control, and then the shoulder drive to the takedown. Excellent reductionist content. But yeah, I think that is the point. I just wanted to try to give the audience a little bit of an understanding of some of what we were working.
Yes.
And then
let me rein in my ADD and answer the question you asked me before I went on a rant. You're right. I totally didn't answer your question. That's on me. Okay. So common in all the programs I teach, because they're all trying to solve different elements of the same problem, which is interpersonal violence. We control position, pressure, and angle from the moment we make physical contact. This is constant regardless of whether I'm grappling or it's empty hand or I'm striking or there's a weapon in play. As soon as I go hands on, I'm controlling position, pressure, and angle. So like you said with the mountain goat drill, that's a pressure and angle problem, right? Trying to not be head to head, but to create angle, trying not to let the person get a superior angle and deal with them, somebody who's really driving. So a similar approach to that concept, or a dialed down approach to that concept. For me, once we've gotten our hands on that weapon bearing limb, they're going to lose their shit because we know that's what they're going to do, right? They want that weapon back. They brought it for a reason, and they're going to do what they can to get that thing back. People react fairly predictably. If you do this enough, you find there's only a few real solutions if you're really driving after the person. And controlling that position, pressure, and angle, once you get your hands on it, isn't technical. it's a switch that you just kind of turn on. Like, oh, I need to like not stand here and try and do a move. I've got to drive. So if they try and pull clear, I'm going to run them over. And if they're heavier than me and they're driving hard, at least they're not going to run me over. And then if I change my angle, then it gives me a little position. From there, we basically have 3 positions that we work. That's it, right? It was 2 and a feathered in a third. Actually, it was 3, but we kind of threw one out. So in 22 years, we have shaved off a couple things and changed the presentation. So like you said, we have what I stopped calling the baseball bat position because everybody was holding like a baseball bat because that's what you call it.
I do remember you saying that.
Yeah, actually, I kind of hold it with my hands here because I want both hands weighted down on the wrist. We go to the 2-on-1, but it's not a 2-on-1 with head position because, like I said, I don't bring my head in here. And if we threw a knife on the mat in my gym and you grab that position on anybody in a Muay Thai or Jiu-Jitsu class, they're all going to snap your head down, or they're going to post on your head and then square back up because you've got an outside angle. So I keep my head to the outside of the shoulder when we go 2-on-1 because for me, the 2-on-1 isn't a standing control position. It's an angle to put them on the floor, similar to an Uchimata or something. Like once I drive in and they're pushing back hard, when I go 2-on-1, I'm spiraling them down to the floor on their face. And I'm dropping my whole body weight on it, like almost like a drop sandbag, like almost when you turn and throw, because they're pushing. And so when I whip them down, we're still going to the ground. The other one is if those 2 fail and they're creating an angle, then I'll go to some kind of back take or side body lock, similar to what Craig calls a split seatbelt, right? And those are the 3. That's it. Those will solve all the problems. And the nice part is they all support each other. So where one fails, the other will succeed. And that's kind of what we strive to do is only, as much as we need to control this person, but no more. Because I get people who will say, well, I have this background. Can I do this? And my usual answer, not trying to be snarky, is can you? Like if you have the game to do it, if you've got some slick wrestling, jiu-jitsu game, sambo, judo, and you have some move that you hit on everybody, if you can pull it off in this environment, then you can do it. But I can't teach it to the general public because you developed that over years and it's specific to you. So there's room to add in other things as an individual if you've already got the move. But if I'm just teaching the program as it is, we can keep it as simple as possible. And you really don't need extra. And I've spent 20 years since the first VHS tape came out. And we just reshot or sort of updated our presentation of that because I've got 20 years now of kind of refining things. And to your point about starting on the inside, when I first used to lay the thing out, I always started from the outside in, mainly because in my head, the priority is always trying to end the situation from as far away as possible. Worst case scenario is they get up, you allow yourself to be ambushed because, you were distracted or not paying attention or whatever, or you get hit by a third party. But just from coaching, I found that all I end up doing is telling people, hold on, we'll get to that. Hold on, we'll get to that. So I'm like, let's just start in the worst case scenario. I'll answer that one first because that's where everyone's mind is going and save the mental energy they're using questioning everything. And then we kind of just build our way back out. That's awesome. Because the 2 questions they have is, what if I'm already getting stabbed and the person's grabbed onto me? And how do I get a hold of it if he's rushing me? So...
Yeah, excellent. And let me say this because this is kind of cool from this discussion, Jerry, because my notes that I have from your block of instruction, I had almost everything that you just lined out there, but just having you say it again on video just adds to my notes and really helps clarify because it's been a little while since we did the content. And so, it's really cool. Right now, you're just
I'm a one-trick
redo
pony.
my notes.
I just repeat the same things over and over again.
Well,
just play the greatest hits.
Reductionist curriculum, the greatest hits, is what works for everybody from all breadth of experience, from a rank beginner to an MMA stud or top level black belt, whatever. Works for all of them. So,
well, and that's the thing is it's so easy. I mean, I think it's thankfully a pragmatic, practical approach is becoming more common than it used to be. But there is still a lot of pushback where it's not that hard. We can, like I said, we can test everything, but a lot of times to question what I've been taught or what I've spent so much time perfecting comes with a lot of baggage, and so people will just kind of turn a blind eye. But all of this stuff is testable. When people say, "I don't think that would work," or "That'll just get you killed," and all right, like, we can try it. If you've got a better idea, I'm totally down. I tell everybody at seminars when I teach them, you are free to call BS on whatever I show. Please be polite about it so we don't become enemies. But if you say that I don't think this will work, and I've got students, I had a student he's moved now, but he was with me for 12 years, who came to a knife defense workshop, was having trouble with something, came with his brother. And they were both, as brothers do. I'm sure not you guys, but other brothers, when they train together, will crash into each other. And they were doing that in the corner. And like, you know what? They told each other, like, I don't think this is going to work. Let's call the guy over and basically punk me. Like, all right, this is not going to work. Watch, I'm going to just totally, make this thing fail. I didn't know. So they called over and said, hey, we're having trouble. Go do it with him. So I'm like, okay, well, let me see what's going on. And it worked as it was supposed to. I found all this out later. They're like, you know what? That day I was going to embarrass you in front of everybody, which,
wow.
Yeah. But he's like, but it turned out it worked. Right. And I've done the same thing where I was teaching a gig in Arizona. In fact, Cecil was at this one, I want to say. And there was a big old corrections guy in the room. There was a lady with her daughter there, and they're working on the tactics. And she goes, okay, but what is she going to do with somebody your size? And she's a teenager. And so I'm like, well, no, we're not really, I'm not strengthening anything on this one. It has more to do with drive from the legs. And I looked around and I'm like, okay, here's kind of a comparable thing, this big old corrections guy. So I brought him over, and it was like you could hear the record scratch at the party, and all the music stopped, because all of a sudden everybody turned and was watching me and this giant dude. And fortunately it worked out because the tactics are sound. But again, it's all testable, and it is designed to work in these situations. Yeah, it's going to be harder if a person's bigger because they're bigger. But when we trim off all of the fat to something that brings it down to the root that everyone can understand and apply, it's still our best option.
Well, on that point, a lot of people are, of course, in our audience are familiar with the OODA loop, and I am not an expert on what Colonel Boyd did, but I do know this, that the OODA loop was a process to decide on what one of 4 maneuvers in a fighter plane that you would choose based on that OODA loop. And so it's 4 things that these fighter pilots would choose. I mean, that's pretty dang reductionist, kind of about the same thing if you ask me.
No,
so,
100%.
This whole reductionist concept I've seen as I am not even close to, I don't have close to the years that Eric has, but he kind of pulled me in here after he had been in at this higher level of reductionist and learning from guys like Craig and Cecil. And then, of course, so now we know lineage from you too, that I witnessed how this reductionist attitude and not attitude, but approach is freaking effective. So I always try and remember that OODA loop. What it really came down to was choosing one of those 4 maneuvers that the fighter pilots had at their disposal.
Yeah, it's a commonality in combat sport. I mean, that's the coolest thing about, because again, it was I was going to play music, or I was going to run a gym, right? I was going to be a ninja. Those are my 2 things I want to do as a kid. Played the music thing, but I don't have the talent for it. And I had a window of opportunity to actually start training martial arts and teaching it for a living. So that's where I ended up. And the blessing of it all is that, it's afforded me the ability to travel and teach in Europe and Australia and Southeast Asia, and kind of meet all these different people and meet some really high-end athletes, guys who are way more gifted than I ever will be or have been. And I talked to a guy when I was in Czech Republic who had won some Muay Thai or kickboxing championships. And we were kind of talking about the stand-up thing. He's like, honestly, I'm not very good. He's like, it's most of the stuff, and this is through broken English. But he's like, right straight, left kick, maybe cross hook, right kick. But he had a very simple game. And then the nice part is the more we shave down all of those other options, the more depth we get on the few that we have. So did you find ways to apply those everywhere? Right? Maybe I don't, in order to make this dish, maybe I don't need more ingredients. I need to get better at understanding how to use the ones that I already have. And I think that was an issue in martial arts in general that I was brought up with, and that a lot of martial artists had, which was the idea that it was an accumulation of some new moves that were going to solve these problems, as opposed to getting better at whatever skill set you already had. Combat sport helped with that, because it gave you a very tangible way to experience this and process this. And when you start having success on the mat with different people, it reinforces it. And I think without that foundation, without that feedback of bodies to train against, we run into issues, and then people start sort of theoretically coming up with solutions. So again, starting off with the knife defense thing, you can kind of tell when you watch, you're like, they haven't trained that with pressure. These guys aren't even driving. You can dissect things fairly quickly because you've been training so much with pressure that you already kind of see where it's going to go.
Well, and Jerry, and to kind of close out an understanding for the audience, and it was brilliant the way that you started with the problem first instead of, okay, how do we get here? But you only had 4 hours, or 2. Was it 2 or 4?
2.
It was 2.
I thought it was
That's
going to be
okay.
much longer, and then I found out when I got there, I'm like, oh, okay.
Yeah. So for our audience out there, so they, get an idea. You closed the loop on that though. So then we started at distance, and from the normal, what it would be a typical knife stab, for lack of a better term, at that point, we're not trying to stop or catch. It's that kind of dive into it, and that double in the 2-on-1, and then move into the control positions. It was excellent.
The most counterintuitive approach is moving forward against somebody with an edged weapon who's trying to put it in you.
Wow.
That sounded more obscene than I meant for it to be. But yeah, somebody who's coming at you with a weapon and you've got to go towards them. That's the hardest part of that tactic. It's stupid simple, but you have to overcome that. That's one thing that's nice about like the shock knives is you still have that visceral response. And I've known a lot of people who've overused them and you lose that response and it just becomes another thing. But if you only bring them out sometimes, your body reacts, your hair stands on end when you hear that crackle. Actually, it's laying around here somewhere. But it does push forward the idea that, again, the moment I decide it's going to go to be physical, I have to move into the person. I can't stand and leave space between us, right? In the old school trapping range where we're doing all this stuff in here, that space will get filled by somebody. And if it's going to be filled, I want to be the one closing that distance and tying on, regardless of whether they're striking or swinging a weapon at me. So once you can get past it and get anchored on it, now you can start refining your grips, get your position, and put it on the ground.
Yeah. Excellent. Yeah, because I am definitely one of those that I have used the shoulder stop and
me too.
Going for, that's where a lot of my base was from. But now
I showed that in my first tape. Right in my first VHS tape that's
probably where I originally got it.
Because that was as much as we'd come up with. The dive and drive came later. The shoulder stop it's intuitive because you kind of hollow out and you have to back up, and because your hands want to reach out and protect you. The biggest issue with it is that it allows them to, because I'm not anchoring on that first beat, it allows them to change their angle and continue to cause problems. And the more chances I give them to renew attack, the more chances that's going to land somewhere that I don't want it to land. But if I can rewire that so that I crash, I can tie on, and even if I do get caught, it's going to be the one, and now I've got it.
it was excellent, and now it's, I'm still working on it, but it's become my method of getting that initial control.
Love
Absolutely. Warren, what you got, brother?
Well, before we go a little bit further, Jerry, what we thought about something earlier, the fact that you are in California, and many know that it can be a little rough, or at least there is the assumption from those of us like in Oklahoma that, carrying a pistol is almost nothing here. But how you navigate that system, the carrying regime there in California, because assuming that's part of your toolkit too.
Actually, I don't. These days, I spend. I'm an adaptive organism, so I spend my time in my gym where I don't want it in here because I could have a lockbox here, and I do have, but yeah, I'm just like I live a very sheltered life. I've worked hard to make it so because it's gnarly.
Okay.
My gym's in a great place. I go from home to gym and back. I'm usually wearing fight shorts or gi pants and flip flops. So I'm not, more often than not, I'm not carrying.
Okay.
Although it did get gnarly out here in 2020, I'll say that changed things a little bit. Especially when
a little bit of rioting stuff going on.
Yeah, when they burned down the 10th Planet Gym in Long Beach.
Oh wow! Yeah. I didn't know that.
Yeah, and of course, all the California people went, "What?" And so then you started calling everyone, going, "Hey, there's supposed to be, this thing going on in this neighboring city, or actually a few blocks away from the gym." So then people start showing up at the gym, and you just kind of get some food and hang out. So yeah, it was interesting.
Wow. Well, cool. Well, we probably should have asked you about that beforehand, but I'm kind of glad that, it came out the way that it did. Thanks, Jerry. And so as far as your red zone knife defense videos, now you mentioned earlier, and maybe we can talk about that a little bit. So you've been refilming and are preparing that for a release as well.
No, that's actually
for an upcoming release. I'm sorry.
That is in the can, as they say, and almost edited. I need to add music, and I realized in the editing process that there were a couple clips that I missed. That I was like, oh, I'll come back and reshoot this, and I didn't go back and reshoot it. So there's a couple things I have to reshoot. So my goal was to get it out before Christmas. It's probably going to be late January, early February that the new one will be out. The other thing that I'm having an issue with is, again, we started in VHS and then we went to DVD, and it's time to get all of this stuff on a streaming platform. And so I've been trying to figure out the technical elements to putting that thing out there. Same thing with like transferring over the adaptive striking series, which is all still on DVD as well. So hopefully those will be out soon. I'm sorry.
Well, maybe we can talk to Mike Seeklander with the way
I don't
that
know
he
Mike.
and so Mike's, and of course Mike Seeklander being a professional shooter and friends with Rob Latham.
Okay.
They put out a video called the
Bigger Circle.
Bigger Circle. Thank you, Aaron. And they streamed it all online. So maybe I can drop him a line and ask him.
If you could, that'd be great. Like it's still something I'm trying to come to terms with how that all works.
Yeah, maybe that can be a solution, or maybe it can be a means to finding your solution. So yeah, we'll hit up Mike.
Yeah,
that'd be great. Thank you.
Super cool guy. I guarantee you, he's going to point you in the right direction.
Beautiful.
Yeah, awesome. So yeah, I can't wait for that myself. I will definitely be a purchase or a patron of that product, and maybe we can have you back on and talk about it again. And
I would love to.
It's not that we have this massive audience, but there's enough people that would like to hear about it. So,
dude, I'm having a blast. So I'd love to.
Awesome. We kind of like to say, but the audience we have is the exact audience that we want.
Yep.
Exactly. Yeah.
So it's pretty dang cool. We've got no when you show up to training events and at least half of the people are a fan of your show, you feel like you're putting out the right content, you know?
For sure.
It was wild at the Combatives Summit how many people were listeners of the show that
you guys were rock stars.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that. but absolutely, like Aaron said, the people that self-select into the Combatives Summit or other events like it, they're probably going to be listeners.
No, but I mean, you not to blow smoke up your tokus, but it's important to have guys like yourselves out there getting information out. It's why, it's how I found out, like when I found out, Aaron Janetti did a podcast. I think he did one with John. I'm like, oh, cool. Cause I hadn't met him and I was kind of curious what he did on the knife defense thing. And then he mentioned some people and you make those connections, going with music. I'm one of those people who will deep dive. I'll find a band that I like, find guys and musicians in there that I like, find out who they played with, and now I'm into their band and then their side project, and then they got connected and this guy produced it. And you find out all of these other things you wouldn't otherwise know. So you guys interviewing these people and having them bring these information up. Plus, I think it's good for us, the coaches in the community, to be able to hear from each other and hear kind of what everyone's doing. So it's good that you guys are out there doing that. And obviously you found your audience, so that's great.
Excellent.
More people should know about it.
Thanks a lot, Jerry. Appreciate those kind comments.
Well, Jerry, speaking of music, I believe that we are at the point in the show for the most important question.
Obviously.
What are your 3 favorite bands and or musicians?
So, see, I don't know that I got the and/or music. That's okay. First off, that question is rough because, like, if you said genres, at least I could pick off of a genre. Like, okay, who are my favorite, bands in this area? And then sometimes there's artists I have. Like, you get like a bass player like Victor Wooten, who's amazing, and not just because of his technical prowess, but his sense of groove and timing and his musicality and everything he does. It's not just technically impressive, because I played in metal bands, I played in alternative bands, I played in ska and jazz bands, and all, playing bass in all of those things is different. And when it came to the metal bands, I was more a fan of like Iron Maiden and that kind of thing. Steve Harris was awesome. So it's where how I learned to play triplets on my bass.
Oh, nice.
Became like a snob about playing with your hands versus playing with a pick. So
let me interject real quick. Yes. So the 3 bands, 3 musicians, that is a starting point.
Okay.
If the conversation goes deeper, wherever you want to go is where we go. That's a starting point. All right. Okay. So you talk about whatever you want, because you started talking about a language that I'm really following you. So, and Eric will too, because we've been musicians for 35 years ourselves, and I am more of a guitar player than anything. So and since we're musicians, that's why this is our damn show. We'll talk about music. And that's why we have some of our favorite musicians every now and then. Let's do it.
Conversation. So
let's talk genres then, if that's the route you want to go.
Yeah, the only one I'm not a country fan as a genre, but I've heard stuff that I like. The closest I would get to country would be like the Eagles, those guys were pop,
California
maybe
country
pop.
Kind of thing.
Exactly. Or rockabilly. Like I'm a huge Brian Setzer fan.
Woo!
So the Stray Cats are awesome, but that guy, when I liked the Stray Cats, I was like, okay, they were cool and I liked the vibe of rockabilly, but I wasn't old enough to really appreciate what a phenomenal guitar player he was. So when Brian Setzer Orchestra came out, and I got thrown out for bootlegging on my giant VHS-C camera, or actually I was holding it here at one of his shows, but I really started to dig what he was doing with that. Then that was pre like neo swing that happened in the 90s. But yeah, so he's a phenomenal guitar player, and I love listening to all these stuff he does, even though he puts out like 50 jillion Christmas albums now. But Brian Setzer is really cool. But even
he's
like
ridiculous.
Yeah. Victor Wooten, like I mentioned, anything that he plays on, I want to hear. because I like regardless of genre, what he does, and how he plays in the groove, and also can play the melody with that same feel without just becoming flashy. I was never a fan of like, your Billy Sheehan's, if we're talking bass players, your Yngwie Malmsteen, like Speed for Speed's sake, the musicality has to be there, or I don't care. Like I kind of go numb. It just becomes noise. So musician wise,
so Victor Wooten, as far as I know, he used to kind of put on seminars himself.
Yeah.
Where people would, he had, 10 people, almost like a weekend class that we all like to attend. You go and hang out a weekend with Victor and just make a bunch of music, learn big group kind of,
yeah. See, I never had a
of
chance to attend
players.
those things. I ran across him because the NAMM convention was here in Anaheim. So annually, yep. I know they do one is it Nashville? I don't know where the other one is. There's do two
Nashville
now.
And they used to do Anaheim. Do they not do Anaheim anymore?
I don't know. I had a hookup back in the day, and I used to see him go there for Federa basses and do demos. And I'm like, this guy's amazing. And that's how I found out about Bella Fleck and the Flecktones.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how I dug into what he was doing. Still not a huge banjo fan, but and I'm not a fan of his brothers at all. I don't like that 80s synth and the guitar sound that he has. It's like when he plays with the Wooten brothers. I'm not into that. What he plays is awesome. But anyway, so that's kind of how I got into Victor's stuff. And then later on, he started doing more of the broad spectrum. He wrote his book, which has been sitting on my shelf with all the other books that I'm like, I need to read that. And there's like a giant stack of books I haven't read yet.
That's me.
Yeah, huge Fishbone fan from forever. I'm trying to think of like bands where I'm like, I have all the albums. I had the fortune of when I was playing in like an alt rock band at the Whiskey, he came in
nice
because we were playing with the Skeletones, like a local ska band. He came in and was backstage, so I got to jam with Angelo Moore and some of the ska musicians. So that was fun. And kind of as a Fishbone fan, I kind of marked out for him pretty hard. So that was a neat experience. And the more like the stuff he's doing now, I think is just trying to regain the glory days. But Truth and Soul was a phenomenal album by Fishbone, as was I really enjoyed Give a Monkey a Brain and He'll Swear He's the Center of the Universe. I'm trying to think. So Fishbone Primus, though, like it's an acquired taste. Les Claypool does his whole weird stuff. I like Primus, and I liked Tim Alexander, who's a big gun guy now, from what I understand. He's really into like that stuff. The drummer, Tim Alexander.
Go ahead, Aaron.
If maybe you're not aware, we've had him on the show.
I did not know. Oh, you know what? I did know. I didn't realize it was your show. I remember I mentioned to Eric, or I don't know, one of you guys, when we first started messaging about doing the podcast a long time ago, and somebody told me that, and I marked out. I was like, dude, Tim Alexander's on there. It's like my favorite drummer that played with Primus.
He's absolutely, hands down, my favorite drummer.
Yeah.
My biggest influence. Even though I don't play a lot of that anymore, if you hear me just kind of jamming or playing some grooves and stuff, you'll hear some Tim Alexander in what I play.
Yeah, well, he always had that crazy kit too, that Neil Peart style, like everything, every percussive instrument I could find, I'm gonna strap to this thing somehow. But
Neil Peart was his biggest influence.
Yeah, there you go then.
Yep.
I don't know, it's Christmas time. The Vince Guaraldi trio was amazing. And he was always able to kind of capture the seasonal thing, but just like I'm very into power trios. I mean, Fishbone wouldn't be a good example, but that's kind of more of a ska influence. But like the Police, huge fan of the Police. I love Stuart Copeland.
Yep.
Like the lyrics,
he's influenced darn near every drummer.
Yeah.
No matter genre.
He like and Minimal Kid. Well, actually, that's not true. Synchronicity had a big old kid. But so obviously, drum and bass players like always draw my attention. I started playing bass because out here in Southern California, the Chili Peppers used to play local skate shows, and so when I was in middle school, I was a skater.
Rock
And
on.
yeah, I would see the Chili Peppers play at the skate shows. So you'd have the half pipe, and then the Chili Peppers on a stage on the side there. And I was like, I remember because I had a friend who played guitar, and I'm like, I want to play whatever that is that Flea was playing, because I loved the percussive element of a slap bass. And he's like, okay, that's a bass guitar. So that's how I ended up playing bass. So whatever's making that sound, that's what I want to play.
Rock on. Well, so real quick, you said power trios. Are you by chance a fan of King's X?
I am. Absolutely. There's so many, I like to be able to hear all of the instruments. I like to be able to I like the musicians to be able to have space to breathe and express, as opposed to having to kind of stay in the pocket in order to not step on everyone's toes. And the more you add in there, the more you kind of have to, if you're playing for the song and not just to get off, you have to step back. But the trio allows it to breathe, and I like that.
Yeah, King's X, I think musicians really dig King's X. Unfortunately, they never kind of went as big as maybe some of us would like them to. But you know what? At the same time, man, some of the best music just is not hugely popular.
Well, I mean, not to sound like a cynic, but the stuff that's made for the masses is made for the masses, and it's the lowest common denominator.
Yep, exactly.
And that sounds music snob, because I think there has to be musicality.
But it's kind of true.
Yeah,
depends on who it is.
You don't like Tom Waits. I like Tom Waits, and again, I got put on to Tom Waits because he did the voice of Tommy the Cat in Tommy the Cat from Primus. And I was like, who is that? And like, that's Tom Waits. You don't know Tom Waits? And then it turned out I knew Tom Waits' songs, but I didn't know who he was, or that Rod Stewart covered one of his songs. So like, again, but you either like them or you don't. It's an acquired taste, and I get it. And I guess that's what a lot of the punk rock scene. I mean, even the logo for my gym, right? This is the Black Flag logo with the Misfits on it. Yeah,
that's awesome.
One of my gym logos. I have the shirts that have this here.
I don't think I've seen that, Jerry. That's awesome.
That's cool.
Yeah. So it's the Black Flag logo, but I used the Misfits font right here.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Just kind of mesh it up together. Very
well. That's
cool.
the cool part. Is I'm like, it's my gym. So it's like that. That's the hard part. Is like even making the videos. I spend so much time trying to find the right music. I'm like, dude, just get it done. And not overthink
I knew you were rock and roll. I honestly did, just from the interactions. But you're definitely rock and roll, man.
If we had done this at my house, like there's an upright bass and like where all my stuff is, and a bunch of guitars and my jazz bass and a keyboard. Like I have like a whole little music setup in the background. But I'm at the gym.
Sounds like some jamming.
I think it needs to happen
at some point.
Well, we've got a bass player, a drummer, and a guitar player.
That's what I'm saying. We have our own power trio.
Man,
awesome.
I think we're
doing an event at my gym. We always do a Christmas roll at the end of the year. It's like a 2-hour thing. I turn off the lights. I light up my gym with like Christmas lights and whatever decorations, and I project on the ceiling. Get a TV with the fireplace on, and usually I just curate a Christmas soundtrack for the 2 hours, and we have some kind of refreshments, but basically it's just an open map. But this year I might actually have like a local jazz group coming in here to do live music during the Christmas roll. So we'll see how that works out, but it's in the early stages, and I still have a couple of weeks to see if it'll work. But I thought
cool.
Yeah, that'd be fun.
Well, man, make sure if that happens, take a little bit of video if you have time. I know that might be hard. Bare minimum, just let us know if the live band it kicks off.
For sure.
If you get it happen, because I'd love to hear about that.
Yeah, that'd be really neat.
Well, I guess we're kind of at a closing, Jerry. I would hope that this starts, as Aaron says, repeat offender. We would definitely love to have you on, as much as we can get you on.
I'd love to be back, man. There's plenty of things we could talk about.
Oh, obviously.
I don't know if anybody else is going to want to hear it, but yeah.
Oh, I'm positive of it, Jerry. Positive, buddy. Well, man, I think then we'll just go ahead and let you go for the evening. And, you know, if you got a little class to still attend to, and we'll just say goodnight then.
All right,
well,
guys.
and make sure real quick before we get off here that people can get a hold of you.
Oh, okay. Yeah, if you want to find out more about the program, go to rzthreatmanagement.com. That's for the red zone stuff. Yeah, and centerlinegym.com for my gym in California. And then on the social media, both Insta, Facebook, that kind of stuff, you can look up Centerline Gym or Red Zone Threat Management, and you'll find us up there.
And I'll put all that in the show notes as well.
Cool. Thank you.
Excellent, guys. It's nice meeting you over the internet here, Jerry. It's a lot of fun chatting with you, man.
It's been a pleasure, man. Thank you.
Excellent time. You guys take care.
All right. Thank you, guys.